Making his debut today, we have Mr. Nicholas Nelson, an Executive Chairman of Equatorial Mining and Exploration. Very good morning to you, Nicholas.
Good morning, Nick.
Right, our backgrounds are sort of old school stockbrokers and the likes, and off air we've talked about a lot of mutual friends. How on earth did you end up being in this position as the Executive Chairman of Equatorial Mining?
When I left stockbroking, I then entered the world of financial PR, and I developed my ability to manage companies, to understand the way that companies work. And I then started to invest in small cap companies, and eventually I was invited to join the boards as non-executive positions of small AIM and plus quoted companies, and companies which were thinking about floating because of my full range of experience and knowledge. And then one day we decided to float the very first plus market shell.
Yep.
And we raised about £1 million. We didn't know what we were going to invest in. We just called it rare earth minerals at the time, because that was the flavour of the month at the time. And then suddenly it wasn't the flavour of the month, and we had to look at something else. And then somebody came up with the idea of Nigerian coal. Ugh, Nigeria, ugh, coal, really? Do I have to look at that? Go on then. I thought, let's just put the prejudices to one side. I flew out there, and the scales fell from my eyes. I was able to move. I was there for a week. I was able to move around the countryside, and I didn't just stay in the cities. Okay, I met a few people in the cities, the men in grey suits, so to speak. But then I travelled down into the depths of the countryside and found a very friendly reception. Yes, it's rough. Yeah, there's a lot of accidents. In fact, the roads are littered with overturned lorries and buses and cars because it's chaos. It's very disordered. Very few people know how to drive properly. All the cars are unregistered and non-maintained. And that's one of the main dangers of living out there, or working out there, I mean. But what I found was a tremendously warm reception, a desire to do business with the British. Many of the older people still remembered the British under the colonial times, and they still cherished us for that. And so they were very pleased that maybe the British were back. So aside from the warm reception, I then started asking questions about what is the demand for coal. Is there actually any coal? I was taken to a village, and there outside the chief's hut were big sacks of coal. My gosh, so coal does actually exist. Take me to the pit. Where does it come from? We drove down a track into the wood, and there was a pit, a very shallow, open-cast pit, where the topsoil was no more than 2 metres. That's all you have to do, shift 2 metres of topsoil, sandy topsoil, not granite or rock, and there's a lovely thick coal seam. And that's suddenly when I thought, wow, there has to be something here. It's so easy to produce this stuff. It's such high margin material, and there's a ready market. There's almost unlimited market just within Nigeria itself, from the growing cement industry and the ceramics industry, and also the coal gas industry, which is emerging. There's also a lot of export potential when that time comes. But just the local industry is enough to make my company extremely profitable when the time comes.
Well, let's go into the detail, okay? So you're an investment vehicle concentrating on coal mining assets in Nigeria. You joined the NEX market in 2011. Nigeria is one of the largest oil producers in the world, people forget, and it's now Africa's largest economic output, which surprised me. In terms of your license, you've got a 660 square kilometre piece of land.
Yeah.
Your market cap at the moment is 35 million.
Wow.
I noticed that you had a rights issue that was announced in December. So are you at the stage now whereby it's full steam ahead?
Yes, it has. Although I say Nigeria is easy to proceed with, it's been a very great learning experience for me.
Right.
It's a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, as you're being led up different alleys and learning the process, learning their cultural. But I've got there after 4 or 5 years. We now have opened up our first pit, and we have started producing, and we've started selling. Okay, I touched on this in the last announcement I made, so I'm not disclosing anything new here. So it's being sold to the local cement industry. I'm not going to tell you which customer either, but it's one of the world's biggest cement companies. We've just started. The other day we had to stop because we discovered that there was an anomaly within our pit, but we've restarted again now, and the machines are back on site today. We're just starting small, just testing it. The one thing that I've learned is the ease with which you can do business out there. Now imagine now that you wanted to mine coal in a village in England. Imagine you approached a small village.
You had protesters and all sorts.
Exactly. You know what? And then after all the protesters, you get somebody with a great crested newt society emerging or the rare orchid society emerging. You simply couldn't do it. Out there, they welcome you with open arms, so much so that they say, I'll tell you what, Mr. Nicholas, why don't you use our village green as the loading pad? Oh, fine. Yeah, we'd like to see all our coal, all your coal, in front of the chief's hut, and you can take it from there. It's that they're that willing to do business. I've learnt not to be too involved with the men from the ministry as such. You know, we're compliant in all regards. They can cause a few problems if you become too embedded with ministerial types, official civil servants. Just stick with the locals, stick with the chiefs, stick with the local people. Just give them what they want. Build a few roads for them, build a classroom for them, a little hospital for them. It costs nothing. And yet the coal is still the same value in Nigeria as it is here, about $70 a tonne, theoretically.
So I always ask chief execs why I should consider having the shares in my portfolio.
It's the extraordinary opportunity and the first mover advantage that my company has. We are still the only non-Nigerian company exploring for any solid minerals at all in Nigeria. Over 4 years, we've developed a process and a network, connections, an ability to do things. I've got a team of Europeans and Nigerians on the ground working for me. So we're there, we're a machine ready to do many other things. Coal is just the start. The country is rich in minerals, as you pointed earlier. And all those minerals are needed locally and for export. And they're all very easy to excavate because the cost of excavation is cheap as chips. Fuel is cheap, labour is cheap, machinery is cheap. And it's the general prejudice against Nigeria which has kept the other Western economies out. They still believe they're going to die if they get out there. Right. They'll fail, they'll get burnt or whatever. And that's what I thought originally. I've overcome that and believe that as the only Western company in Nigeria, it's a gigantic opportunity for us with the right backing and investment. And that's something that I have to address.
Okay, so my last question in this interview would be that when I was a teenager, my father travelled extensively in Nigeria, and he was talking, it was very tribal over there, and you know, you had to be in with the government. Would you say it's stable now, politically, socially, economically?
Yeah, it's more stable than it was in your father's time. Your father was probably there during a variety of civil wars and whatever. Yeah. When was he out there?
Well, I was a teenager, so...
okay, fine. All right. So, yeah,
30 years ago.
Okay, so unstable. Since then, we've had a series of 2 presidents which have maintained stability. There have been no civil wars. There's a little bit of terrorism, well, quite a lot of terrorism, in the far northeast of the country. Yeah. And there's some kidnap and ransom going on in the country. At the tribal level is exactly as it's been for 1,000 years. Nothing's changed. You drive out of the big cities, you enter the villages, and all they're interested in is preserving the status quo. They all revere their local chief. The federal government is just so distant from them that it doesn't have any impact on them at all. Yes, I have to meet the federal government officers to a limited degree. They're happy to leave me alone because there's a great push to invite foreign investors in, particularly for solid minerals. And once you're in there, and once you've shaken hands with the right people, they'll just leave you alone and allow you to get on with it. They've been very, very helpful.
We've run out of time.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely fascinating. Nicholas, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Pleasure.